Doesn't this seem like a rather loose governance model to you? It just does to me off the top of my head. I worry about accountability. I worry about infighting. I mean, I want my agency to get all the dollars. You want your agency to get all the dollars. How does this all get worked out?
Certainly, there's an overall accountability framework that will be worked out, but there's also a fiscal incentive as well. I mean, if an allocation board is unable to come to an agreement on a funding distribution, then that would prevent them from receiving the adult education block grant funding. They would be held accountable in that way, and to the extent our proposal doesn't, there's additional accountability measures that stakeholders would like to implement. We're open ears and would be willing to consider strengthening those.
I've got a question. Where did this idea come from?
It's our proposal. The administration's
from the legislative analyst.
No, that's part of the
Department of Finance.
Department of Finance.
Yes.
And another question: do we have any idea? I would have an idea, having served on a school board and a community college board, how those two entities feel about this idea.
I think Christian Osmendi with the Department of Finance. I think we've heard many of the same concerns. So I think there are concerns about how this would work, and maybe if we could provide some background about how we came to this structure and kind of the things that this reflects kind of an attempt to solve a few problems that we heard over the past.
Well, let me just finish presenting. I've got one or two more.
Okay.
And one of them is, if we have a local allocation board, could they contract with a non-member agency?
Certainly, as exists under current law, school districts and community college districts are able to contract out with other providers for various services. To the extent that consortia plans call for a allocation of funds, for example, to a library to provide some additional services, that's
okay.
Something we would.
And these are all Form 700 type positions. These meetings are held in public. They're subject to the Brown Act, I assume.
Our proposal doesn't speak to that, but
Isn't that a concern, though? I mean, this is the oversight here. I have a concern, and I can present it about the oversight function, how there is oversight. So maybe, what I'll do is I'll step back here and let you speak to that, as well as the other items you wanted to speak to.
Sure.
And I have a kind of a follow-up question, because Mr. O'Donnell comes from Long Beach, and I come from the east part of Pasadena area, Los Angeles County. We're both in L.A. County. Is L.A. County part of the consortias in our district? And then would they be the fiscal agents for more than one consortia? I mean, I don't know. So how does that happen, or how does that work?
Certainly, the structure of the regions, and as part of our proposal, is something that can be modified if regions feel that they'd like to join with another region. So that's something that we intend to provide a little bit of flexibility in that regard. But also, because there are currently 70 regions, and for example, 58 counties, there could be situations where a county is a part of multiple consortia.
Correct. Yeah. Okay.
Can I just ask one question? So would Prop 98 dollars be passed through to non-Prop 98 agencies or efforts?
No. Under our proposal, the dollars would go directly to a fiscal administrator in each consortium. That fiscal administrator would need to be a school district, a county office of education, or a community college district. And the allocation schedule under our proposal would only specify school districts, community college districts, and county offices of education as those entities that could receive funds pursuant to the decision made by the allocation board.
Who makes the determination which of those, since we're collaborating, which of those, you mentioned three. So if you have the county, school district, community college, all being involved, how do we get to the decision which of those three entities becomes the fiscal administrator of the money?
We provided flexibility in our proposal for the members of the consortia to decide how to pick a fiscal administrator. This was consistent with how the planning grants were allocated in each consortium. They've currently designated a fiscal administrator to serve as the entity controlling the dollars or administering the dollars for the $25 million that the legislature appropriated and the governor appropriated these past 2 years.
You know, and Senator Liu, in my limited knowledge and experience as an adult education teacher, we had a case in Riverside where two school districts had adult education. One school district went to the other school district and asked that school district to run their adult education program. At the end of the day, it was my understanding that one school district reneged on the other, and that the school district never received the money from the other school district. So, you know, I do see red flags here.
Sure, and I think that's, you know, I think there are many challenges that we've seen over the past few months in figuring out how do you make a coordinated system of adult education work in a region, not only between school districts, but between school districts and county offices and other providers. And I think the proposal we made regarding the allocation boards attempts to respond at least to a few issues that we've heard. That obviously the consortia have been working together for the past 2 years, and one of the issues that many of these consortia brought to us was we need some guidance about how, ultimately, as has been kind of alluded to in the previous panels, it's been a relatively workable process thus far, but they haven't had to make tough decisions about who is going to really get dollars to provide services. And so one of the comments that was made to us is provide us with some structure about how to allocate funds when they come to us. I think the second issue that we've been trying to respond to is the fact that AB 86 references that other entities who provide adult education may participate in the consortia. But we've heard that that participation is sporadic. That participation in many areas is very good, and in some areas those other providers don't necessarily feel included in the process. And so that, I think, this 7-member allocation board was an attempt to get at those two problems, to provide some guidance about here's how you would make the decision when the state gives you the funds, that you've spent a lot of time coming up with plans for the services that are needed in your region, and this allocation board would help to prioritize those plans and say, of the services you described that address the needs you've described in your adult education plan, here are the top priorities in a given fiscal year, and here's how the dollars should be allocated. And then it formally brings other providers to the table, not to get the money directly, but to inform a more coordinated regional system. Again, I think we've heard the same concerns that many of you have, and I think we've indicated that we'd like to work to respond to those and to figure out how to make this workable, but there are, I think, real problems that we think need a solution, and that's what we've proposed.
Okay, Mr. O'Donnell?
I just have one more comment, a question really. Can you describe the rationale for requiring concurrence by the executive director of the state board? In other words, apparently the local allocation board would make a decision, and then there would require sign-off by the executive director, if I understand it correctly.
And I think concurrence, as we have imagined it, would be I think as the consortia, or as the AB 86 cabinet between the chancellor's office and the superintendent have worked, I think we imagine that same thing. I think it is a sort of a check to keep the State Board of Education involved in this process moving forward as the policy-making entity in the state for at least K-12 education.
And if she doesn't agree?
Then I think, I think we imagine that to be a more kind of collaborative process than a kind of send this back, kind of a rejection. I think we hope that they would work collaboratively and kind of come to a resolution without requiring some type of formal rejection or concurrence.
But again, you're creating a board that's going to dole out dollars, so I just think you need to have some concerns about where this goes.
Of course.
And that's the concern I think you're hearing presented this afternoon.
Sure.
That's a significant concern. Thank you.
And the LAO's response to this idea?
On the allocation boards?
Well, or what you heard from the Department of Finance?
We have similar concerns to what these committees have voiced. Governance is unclear, as Assemblymember O'Donnell noted. Whether or not Prop 98 dollars would be flowing to non-Prop 98 entities would have to be worked through a memorandum of understanding. Just to clarify on the fiscal agent, the fiscal agents, according to the plan so far that have been submitted, 15 fiscal agents are school districts and the rest are community colleges. Those are decided by the consortia themselves. We think the legislature could consider other options to integrate players within adult education and workforce, maybe instead of allowing the allocation committees to be the ones who dole out the dollars, maybe see them more as an advisory board or consider other ways to integrate other providers in this process, maybe by considering funding for other providers within the adult education block grant in some sort of coordinated way could be another option. But we echo some of your concerns in our analysis as well.
Okay. Any recommendations?
On how allocation boards.
Right.
I think that we would go back to our to what I just mentioned a moment ago about maybe viewing these more as advisory committees would be one option. But clearly, governance and accountability is not clear here. So what the legislature could do, if they did want to keep the allocation boards, is just make those lines of accountability more strong. So determine how, at a local consortia, how these members would actually be delegated. For example, in Los Angeles County, there's going to be one representative from a school district. There's many large school districts in Los Angeles County. Would it just go to LAUSD, or would it be another school district if boundaries overlapped? Making some of those things more clear on who exactly would be on these committees, and putting that forth in statute.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from members?
Has anyone, have you done any discussion of how much this will cost to have such an elaborate structure of decision making? It seems like it's a layer, another layer of administration on a program that it seems like it. I assume it worked well prior to folks tinkering with it, and so now we're thrown into another tizzy, and you've spent $25 million. How much would it cost to run this program in the manner in which you've identified? Because that money obviously would be taken out of what would be services for students and families and adults.
Certainly, that dollar amount, we can't quantify that at this point on what that would exactly be. But in the first year, can imagine it being maybe similar to what has been spent over the last couple of years. $12.5 million over 2 years for AB 86. But moving forward, as they're updating plans to account for outcomes of students, maybe different levels of need, additional funding that's provided into the block grant, updating those plans may be less of an onerous task for each area, but we do allow for like 5% of the funds to be used for administrative costs. So there is provisions to pay for those type of collaborative costs.
And I would just add that I wouldn't want to minimize the role of ongoing coordination. It's something that we heard from the consortia as we talked with them in developing the proposal, that it was important to continue to support the planning that's going on between school districts and community college districts. So I don't think we see the allocation board as separate from an ongoing thinking at the local level about how to provide services in a more collaborative way.
I assume that the other portion of the hearing are people who have done this and do it well. My assumption. Yes, no. Yes, somebody said. I assume
You'll be hearing from some consortia members, I think some of whom are some model consortia.
That operated long before we come up with this idea, I assume. No?
Probably.
Let's hope so. Okay. All right.
Is the idea that consortiums continue and the allocation boards are another entity I heard you say that the consortiums would continue? Did I hear you say that?
Correct. This is an ongoing proposal. Consortiums would exist throughout the adult education block grant proposal. Yeah.
And they would also need additional funding.
I don't think we would distinguish between the consortia and the allocation board. I think we are, the consortia over the past 2 years have developed a variety of ways to govern themselves. Many have established, as we've heard, executive committees. They've come up with different ways to make the kinds of decisions that they need to make in order to operate adult education in a sustainable and coordinated way. What we're saying is, consistent with these other ways that you've established to govern yourselves, we do think it's important to have an allocation committee, an allocation board that is structured in this way.
So as far as expenditure, the number that we were saying is that continuing with 12 million, that would be the consortium and the allocation boards.
Yes. So we wouldn't distinguish between the two. And I think, just to maybe to your point, the funding is only one part of what the consortia have spent the past years doing. And they've, as you heard earlier, have talked about assessments. They've talked about common ways of placing students and holding each other accountable. So I think we would imagine that those discussions would continue alongside this funding discussion.
And so having an allocation board would be essential in your viewpoint versus simply having the consortium make the decision?
What we heard was that the consortium wanted some direction from the state. That in the case of, in the case of certain consortia, you had, one community college district and maybe eight or nine school districts, and they felt like what we heard is it would be helpful to give them some sense of how we wanted them to make these decisions.
Any other questions from members? Thank you very much. We will
Madam Chair?
Yes.
We, our office had a
yes,
few
I'm
other
sorry.
recommendations
Yes, go ahead.
pertaining
Yes, you
to
do.
the governor's proposal.
The rest of your...
Okay, great. I think I forgot to state my name earlier.
you.
Natasha Collins, LAO, Judy Hyman, my colleague. I think we went through a major concern that we had with allocation boards, who they would be, how long they would serve, if it would just be community colleges and school districts each choosing their own, and then the seventh one is the tiebreaker, how that would work out, what would happen if there's gridlock. So that's one of our major concerns, as well as on the accountability side. Who would be held accountable for the progress of consortia? Would it be the allocation boards? Would it be the individual providers? Would it be the consortium more generally, is another thing that we think the legislature should consider. I kind of spoke to it a little bit earlier, but just the fact that we're trying to get away from fragmentation and duplication of services, yet we're maintaining a lot of separate funding streams that have similar goals to the adult education block grant. So, for example, community college apportionment funding is not part of the block grant. It's only, it's just not included. Also, other categorical programs within community colleges, namely apprenticeship, which is one of the 5 priority areas for adult education, is being maintained as a separate categorical, which we feel is duplicative. And also those federal WIA, Workforce Investment Act dollars, are not being integrated into this effort. So these are all kind of standing alone, and we would recommend that you consider ways, maybe not to put all this money on the table, although that is an option, but to better coordinate funds towards these efforts, maybe by setting certain conditions around receipt of funds that they need to be used towards the goals of a regional consortia. Another thing that we would note is that the governor's allocation method relies on need, prior year funding, and performance. We think that prior year funding in 2015-16 is appropriate, that we keep schools, hold them harmless from any further cuts because we don't want further erosion of those schools. But we think moving forward, maybe prior year funding isn't as important of a consideration as need and performance, because we know that just because money is going to one area of the state now for adult education, that doesn't mean that that's where the most need is. And we don't want to perpetuate some of those historical inequities in where funding is going with adult education. So moving forward, maybe considering how this allocation method at the state level is going to play out. In terms of recommendations, we would recommend better incorporating some of those funds that also serve the same purpose, as I mentioned earlier. Next, we think that maybe you should consider asking the community colleges and the Department of Education to show you their allocation plan before money goes out this year. As it stands, the legislature isn't involved in this process of determining who gets what in 2015-16. So we would recommend you ask the two entities to come forward and tell you how they decided to allocate the money and see if you want to have a say in that. Another thing that's lacking in the governor's proposal is a lot of detail that you may want to consider or take action on. Specifically, in the way that allocation money is going out, it's based on need, performance, and prior year funding. We haven't defined what need is. We just need to come up with some sort of method to determine what that means and a better way to match need with demand. Second, if we're going to base funding on performance, we need to set clear goals so we can determine what performance is and whether we're getting the returns on the investment that we expected. So we're going to have to put more solid accountability data and the types of data that we want to receive in order to determine if a consortia is doing well or not, if we're going to give them money for doing that.
Do you have any suggestions on that?
On
evaluation
performance?
On performance?
Well, right now, I think the model for performance has been based on the Workforce Investment Act performance measures, which look at it's very clear there's certain benchmarks, student outcome measures, and other student indicators that award funds to adult education providers and literacy through those funds. So that might be an area, that might be a model that the legislature could use. But I think first we need to define what we expect. What are the specific targets that we want to reach within, say, a year or 2 years, and then base our performance model off of those expectations?
I'm just trying to get an idea of what kind of student outcomes we're talking about in adult education.
Yeah, actually, the AB 86 report that came out last week did name a few student outcomes, which I think are kind of generally accepted as some of the outcomes we'd be interested in. These include wages, so the types of wages a student would make after completing a credential program, for example, or a CTE program. They could also include student learning gains, so if you move up 2 levels in reading, that could be a measure of performance. They could also be matriculation, so moving on to higher education, or even just securing a job. Mm-hmm. There's one last thing we'd like to add, which pertains also to some of those consistent fee policies that there's concerns about. We believe that the legislature should consider setting a specific timeline for when a common assessment is going to be developed, when a student identifier will be used, and for when there will be a comprehensive accountability system in place. We think that the funds should probably be tied to this, so there is a definite date that we're going to see the kind of specific recommendations that I think were expected through SB 173. We think that a year is reasonable. And with that, I think that concludes our assessment and recommendations. And if there's any additional questions, we'd be happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other further questions? Thank you very much, panel. Okay, so we have K-12 adult schools and community colleges have been responsible for organizing, coordinating, and implementing AB 86 consortia plans to ensure they meet the needs of adult students. In this panel, the fourth panel, we will hear from 4 different consortia across the state and their AB 86 experiences. We have, I hope, Timothy Pollack from San Diego Adult Education Regional Consortium, Lawrence Teixeira from San Mateo Adult Education Regional Consortium, Sherry Watkins and Lori Morton from the State Center Adult Education Consortium, and Dr. Alfred Ramirez from the Glendale Adult Educational Regional Consortium. So please join us here at the table. And we'll start with Mr. Pollack from San Diego to tell us about your success or issues.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I wanted to start by just sharing that San Diego Adult Education Regional Consortium is very unique. It has one of its members, it has one community college district and one overlapping school district, San Diego Unified. Unique in the sense of not only that the boundaries are aligned very clearly, but also that we have had an ongoing relationship over the past 3 decades in regards to collaboration and alignment of programs, specifically in our high school diploma program. And when AB 86 came to our region, we saw this as an opportunity to magnify the relationship that existed already and had been continued to be fostered by both the institutions and their Board of Trustees. We hold annual joint Board of Trustees meetings in our region, and so we saw this as an opportunity to further the growth of the relationships, deepening them. The structure that we decided on is we decided to flip the pyramid upside down and begin with a faculty-driven process. So over 60 faculty members from both community college non-credit and credit, in addition, K-12 adult education, gathered in work groups to attack the 5 program areas in regards to our the plan outlines and to address the 7 objectives. This structure was all about inclusion and transparency, and we were very proactive in regards to understanding really what the spirit of AB 86 was, and we highlighted collaboration, partnership, and truly just getting to know each other as the focus of this beginning and what we call the very ambiguous and tension-filled process. So with that, we really were looking at, from the AB 86 Summit, a lot of the data that was provided to us regarding the unmet need. And one thing that we identified early on is that as duplication was mentioned and the reduction of duplication, we really wanted to highlight that we wanted to reduce unnecessary duplication, because what we find in our region that the students that both K-12 adult education and community college non-credit serve we had discussions in these faculty groups about they're not just similar students, they're actually the same students. So the students would transition between institutions seamlessly as their needs needed to be met and the course offerings were available at either institution. We really wanted to redesign the delivery of our services, and the intent to collaborate really was the focus. Some of the things that we really reached deep into is the community partnership aspect. And one thing identified early on was SB 173. And we found there was great promise in this because of the reciprocity aspect and the assessment. We integrated CASAS locally into our leadership program and our consortium early on, and had them bring the discussions and the data that they've been collecting for the past 10 years. We reached out to San Diego Workforce Partnership to collect data regarding WIA-funded programs that provided adult education, and started to invite San Diego Workforce Partnership into our consortium as a part of the discussion and leadership team. These efforts really provided a lot of fruit in regards to the discussions and the emphasis at the summit that about bold ideas. So we were challenged by that, and we took on that challenge to address some of those ideas. And two, the ideas, one was around assessments. And we know that assessments typically are referred to in regards to a student's preparation to enter a program. And we felt that really challenged access. So without having to threaten access that we believe is equal for all students, should have equal access, we took assessments, and we're exploring right now using assessments as a diagnostic tool, something that can be integrated into their ed plan as they begin to see parallel paths where they may need development or remediation to help them be successful in the specific area that they wish to achieve. This would be addressed across both Unified and the Community College District. The other conversation was about reciprocity of standards. And we felt that as long as we were providing clear and very confident pathways, seamless transitions for students throughout our system, we felt that it was important that faculty had that same type of transition and pathway. And as we researched and looked at Ed Code, we found that there were availabilities and options for us to be able to grandfather in faculty from K-12 that provide education that in those 5 program areas currently that could have they'll meet the minimum quals through reciprocity or grandfathering in their qualifications, and then also provide pathways for future teachers in K-12 to get the professional development that will allow them to teach across those systems. So therefore, what we do is we bring not only the integration of the students, but the concern of students being unfamiliar between systems has been brought up a lot. Is a student comfortable in one system versus another? And having the partnership and the deepening relationship in our process, we were able to not only see that comfort could be created for the students, but also the familiarity that could be created for the faculty members. I currently am a faculty member at non-credit continuing education in San Diego. I also serve as the Academic Senate President. And I took the opportunity to use the Senate and my involvement also at the state level to integrate and to reach out through resolutions supporting adult education in our region, promoting it across the state Senate plenaries and the activities that the state Senate holds, to try to promote this idea that community colleges need to reach out to K-12 and build those relationships as we had. And we understand that we know that we've experienced similar challenges that other consortium have experienced at different magnitudes. Many of the consortia throughout the state have contacted us, or we have contacted them to discuss challenges that we have, and we are always very willing and open to share what we're doing, because we really feel that it's more than a collaborative at a local level. We really need to reach out into our larger region and then to the state to get the best practices. With that, the last piece is about the student involvement. So along this path in this process, and I want to point out that we began this process last April. So if you can imagine providing the 3 plans to date and the final plan in that short period of time, it did produce a sizable document. Right here I have this. And what we see this document as is it's not the final plan for us, as you would in a grant, but this is yet the beginning of a living document that we continue and will continue to have evolve within the environment that best presents the courses, the pathways, whether it be into post-secondary or into the workforce. Our involvement with the Opportunities Act is significant. In fact, just lately, they appointed myself and other members of our consortium on their steering committee for their planning effort. So now, when we brought them in, we said, you can use our plan as a foundation for your unified plan, and they're working together now. We're deep in that partnership to further how we can use those federal dollars inside our system that's built into this plan also. Thank you.